Take a long, hard look at your bank account. Now, think about your father at your age, or your grandfather. In 1965, the average American man could buy a home, support a wife, and raise 3 children on a single salary from a Ford assembly plant in Michigan. He didn't have to drive for Uber after his 9-to-5 just to make rent. He didn't trade crypto. He didn't have a mountain of student debt. He had a steady job, a stable currency, and a future he could actually touch. Today, you are likely working twice as hard for a currency that buys half as much. You feel it every time you go to the grocery store. You feel it every time your rent increases. You feel a constant low-level anxiety, that gnawing worry about bills, rent, and your retirement fund, that no matter how much you save, the finish line keeps moving further away. You've been told it's just the way things are. You've been told it's supply chains, or bad luck, or your own failure to budget. They are lying to you.
There is a specific moment in human history when the world broke. A precise date when the contract between the government and the citizen was torn to pieces without your consent. That date is August 15, 1971. On that Sunday night, a single man sitting in the Oval Office committed the greatest financial heist in the history of the world. He didn't use a gun. He didn't use a bomb. He used 18 words. And those 18 words have been silently robbing you every second of every day for the last 50 years. To understand the theft, we have to understand the promise.
Gold in the vault at Fort Knox. They were selling 1,000 tickets to a theater that only had 100 seats. Go back to 1944. The world is a graveyard. World War II is ending, and the old empires, Britain, France, Germany, are bankrupt. They've spent every ounce of their gold fighting the Nazis. But there was one country that held the keys to the kingdom, the United States. By the end of the war, the U.S. held 2/3 of the entire world's monetary gold. 730 delegates from 44 nations gathered at a luxury hotel in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods. They had to decide, what is money going to be in the new world? The Americans made a deal that seemed too good to be true. They said, the world doesn't need 1,000 different currencies backed by 1,000 different promises. We have the gold, so we will peg the U.S. dollar to gold at exactly $35 an ounce. And all of you will peg your currencies to our dollar. It was the golden age. The dollar wasn't just paper, it was a claim check. You could walk into the U.S. Treasury, hand them $35, and they had to give you 1 ounce of shining physical yellow metal. The phrase, good as gold, wasn't a metaphor, it was the law. But power, especially the power to create money, is a drug, and politicians are the ultimate addicts. By the mid-1960s, America wanted to have it all. President Lyndon B. Johnson wanted to fight a massive, expensive war in the jungles of Vietnam, and at the same time, he wanted to fund a massive welfare state at home called the Great Society. Wars are expensive, welfare is expensive, but raising taxes is political suicide. So the U.S. government did what every dying empire does. They cheated. They began printing more paper dollars than they had.
They thought nobody would notice. They thought the world would be too distracted by the Cold War and the space race to check the math. But one man was watching, a man who didn't trust American promises. Charles de Gaulle, the president of France. De Gaulle realized that the U.S. was exporting its inflation to the rest of the world. They were buying French companies and French labor with colored paper that they printed for free. He called it America's exorbitant privilege. In 1965, de Gaulle did something that history books barely mention, but it was a declaration of financial war. He didn't just give a speech, he sent the French Navy. Imagine the scene. French warships crossing the Atlantic, docking in New York Harbor. Their cargo wasn't soldiers, it was suitcases full of paper U.S. dollars. Their demand was simple. We don't want your paper anymore. We want our gold. Give it to us, now.
The bank run had begun. France took their gold. Then Switzerland took theirs. Then Germany. By 1971, the secret was out. The United States was bleeding gold at a rate of $100 million every single week. The parking lot was officially full, and there were millions of people still holding tickets. The U.S. Treasury was staring into the abyss of total bankruptcy. On the morning of Friday, August 13th, the final hammer fell.
the British ambassador walked into the Treasury Department and asked to redeem $3 billion worth of gold. That was it. If the U.S. paid Britain, the vaults would be empty. The crown was about to fall. Nixon panicked. He bypassed Congress. He didn't tell the public. Instead, he staged a secret coup against the global economy. That Friday afternoon, he ordered his top 15 advisors to board helicopters for a secret retreat at Camp David. He ordered the phone lines to be cut. He ordered total secrecy. For 48 hours, inside the Aspen Lodge, a battle raged. On one side was Arthur Burns, the head of the Fed, pleading to save the gold standard. He warned Nixon, "Mr. President, if you break this promise, you will destroy the reputation of the United States for a century. You will trigger a fire of inflation that will never go out."
On the other side was John Connally, the Treasury Secretary, a Texas politician with a silver tongue and a heart of cold steel. He told Nixon, "Screw the world. We are going to screw them before they screw us. The dollar is our currency, but it's their problem." By Sunday night, the heist was ready. Nixon sat at his desk in the Oval Office. He looked into the camera, and with a straight face, he lied to the world. He said he was protecting the dollar from speculators. He used the word temporarily. "I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold." With those 18 words, the anchor was cut. The dollar was no longer a claim on a real asset. It was now fiat money, Latin for "let it be done." It was money because the government said it was money. It was money backed by nothing but faith and credit. And as we've seen over the last 50 years, faith is a very fragile thing. The immediate result? The stock market soared. Why? Because Wall Street loves the smell of fresh, unbacked paper. But for you, for the worker, for the saver, the nightmare was just beginning. Without the golden leash, the government spending went vertical. They realized they could print wealth out of thin air to win elections. The national debt, which had taken 200 years to reach a few hundred billion, began to explode into the trillions. Inflation, the silent thief, was unleashed. And for you, the saver, your hard-earned money became a melting ice cube. Suddenly, you were one denied insurance claim or one high deductible away from total medical bankruptcy. The immediate result? The stock market soared. Why? Because Wall Street loves the smell of fresh, unbacked paper. But for you, for the worker, for the saver, the nightmare was just beginning. Without the golden leash, the government spending went vertical. They realized they could print wealth out of thin air to win elections. The national debt, which had taken 200 years to reach a few hundred billion, began to explode into the trillions. Inflation, the silent thief, was unleashed. And for you, the saver, your hard-earned money became a melting ice cube. Suddenly, you were one denied insurance claim or one high deductible away from total medical bankruptcy. By 1979, the dollar had lost half its value in less than a decade. You weren't getting poorer because you weren't working hard. You were getting poorer because the government was diluting your labor. But they needed a way to stop the dollar from dying completely. They needed a new anchor, and they found it in the deserts of the Middle East. In 1974, the U.S. made a secret deal with Saudi Arabia, a deal that would define the next 50 years of global politics and war. The deal was simple. The U.S. would protect the Saudi kingdom with its military might. In exchange, Saudi Arabia would ensure that every single drop of oil sold in the world was priced in only one currency, the U.S. dollar. The Petrodollar was born.
Suddenly, every country on Earth, from Japan to Brazil, had to hoard U.S. dollars just to buy the energy they needed to keep their lights on. This forced the world to keep using a currency that was backed by nothing. It was a brilliant, ruthless, and highly effective way to force the world to pay for America's debt. If you didn't play along, ask Saddam Hussein or Muammar Gaddafi what happens when you try to sell oil in a currency other than the dollar. But even the petrodollar couldn't hide the rot in the heart of the American economy. Look at the data again. After 1971, the productivity of the American worker continued to climb. We got smarter, we got faster, we got computers, but the wages, they flatlined. In a fair system, as you produce more, you earn more. But after Nixon broke the money, all that extra wealth, the surplus of your hard work, stopped going into your pocket. Where did it go? It went to the banks. It went to the top 0.1%. It went to the people who were closest to the printing press. We entered the era of financialization, an era where you don't get rich by making things, you get rich by moving paper. And if you're the one who owns the paper, you are the king. If you're the one working for the paper, you are the slave.
Imagine the global economy as a grand banquet, where money is the plate used to hold the food. Before 1971, the number of plates was strictly limited by the amount of gold in the vault. If you wanted more plates, you had to produce more food, mine more gold, and create real value. But after that fateful Sunday night, the government found a way to manufacture plates out of thin air. And here is the secret they never want you to understand: the Cantillon Effect. When the government prints trillions of dollars, that money doesn't magically fall into your backyard. It has a specific entry point. It flows first into the big banks, the mega corporations, and the political elite at the top of the food chain. These entities get to spend the new money while prices are still low. They use it to buy up real estate, stocks, and hard assets. By the time that money finally trickles down to your paycheck, inflation has already surged. The price of eggs, gas, and rent has already skyrocketed. You are the last one to get the money, but the first one to pay the new, higher prices. You aren't just being robbed of your purchasing power, you are being robbed of your time, the only asset you can never print more of. Look at what happened to the American dream. In 1970, an average home cost about 3 times the median annual family income. Today, that number has ballooned to 7, 10, or even 15 times in a standard apartment in NYC or a starter home in Austin. Why? It's not because bricks and wood are 10 times harder to find. It's because the currency you use to buy them has been diluted into oblivion. The house didn't get more expensive. The dollar simply died.
This structural fracture created a society divided into 2 classes: those who own assets and those who rent their lives. If you owned stocks or real estate in 1971, you became wealthy beyond imagination without lifting a finger, simply because you held things the government couldn't print. But if you are a worker living on a salary, siphoned off by the people who control the printing press, and make no mistake, this isn't a glitch, it's a feature. To maintain this grand deception, the system needs you to stay in debt. When the currency loses value, the only way to maintain your standard of living is to borrow. A mountain of student loans, maxed out credit cards, car payments. The modern financial system is designed to turn you into a permanent debtor. Why? Because a debtor is a compliant worker. You can't strike, you can't quit to follow your passion, and you certainly can't revolt when you're facing foreclosure and have bills due tomorrow. Debt is the modern-day shackle, and inflation is the tool that keeps those shackles tight.
But why is the government obsessed with 2% inflation? Why don't they want prices to stay stable? Because the government is the largest debtor in the history of humanity. With a national debt reaching tens of trillions of dollars, the U.S. has no intention of paying it back with money that has the same value as when they borrowed it. The only way to erase the debt without declaring formal bankruptcy is to inflate it away. They borrow strong dollars today and pay them back with garbage dollars tomorrow. It is a silent default, and the bill is being paid by savers, retirees, and young people trying to build a future. We are currently living through the final stages of the Nixon experiment. Look at what happens every time the system jitters. The 2008 crisis? Print money. The 2020 pandemic? Print more money than ever before. In a 2-year window, 40% of all US dollars ever created in history were conjured out of nothing. We are watching the acceleration of a wheel that is about to fly off its axle. When faith, the only thing propping up that green piece of paper, begins to crack, the entire structure will collapse in a way that no politician can stop. The surge in gold prices and the meteoric rise of Bitcoin are not coincidences. They are the human race's immune response to a broken monetary system. People are looking for an exit ramp, something with a mathematical limit, something that cannot be diluted by a group of men in a smoke-filled room at Camp David.
This story isn't just about history. It's about your life right now. Every time you feel exhausted despite working hard, every time you worry about never being able to retire, remember that night in 1971. You aren't crazy. You aren't lazy. You are just playing a game where the rules were rigged before you were even born.
The fiat system wasn't created to make you wealthy. It was created to transfer wealth from the productive class to the political class. The end of this story hasn't been written yet, but history teaches us that no unbacked currency has ever survived. They all eventually return to their intrinsic value, zero. The only question is, when that day comes, what will you be holding? A pile of faith-based paper or a real asset that no government can take away? This isn't just a failure of economics, it is the ultimate form of social engineering. To keep the 1971 experiment alive, the architects of this system realized they had to change more than just the money. They had to change the truth. They had to manipulate the very way we measure reality so that you wouldn't realize you were being robbed. Enter the Consumer Price Index, or the CPI. In the early days, the CPI was a simple reflection of the cost of maintaining a constant standard of living. If the price of steak went up, the CPI went up. But when inflation began to spiral out of control in the late 70s, the government realized that a high CPI was dangerous. It triggered automatic increases in Social Security payments and revealed the true scale of their currency debasement. So they changed the math. They introduced substitution.
Now, if the price of steak goes up and you're forced to buy ground beef because you can't afford that prime cut, the government claims your cost of living hasn't actually changed. They just say you swapped a ribeye for a generic ground chuck at Walmart, and it's basically the same thing. They introduce these things called hedonic adjustments, claiming that because your new smartphone is twice as fast as your old one, its real price has actually gone down, even if you're paying $300 more for it. By fudging the numbers, they created a hall of mirrors where the official inflation rate says 2%, but your bank account screams 20%. This is the silent tax. It's a tax that doesn't require a single vote in Congress. It's a tax that hits the poorest Americans the hardest. If the government taxed 10% of your income directly, you might march on Washington. But if they simply devalue the currency by 10%, most people just scratch their heads and wonder why life feels so much harder than it did last year. It is a brilliant, cowardly way to fund a global empire and a bloated bureaucracy on the backs of the working class. But the 1971 fracture goes deeper than just prices. It destroyed humanity's time preference. When money holds its value, you are incentivized to save. You plan for the long term. You build things that last. You invest in your children's college fund, saving up for that suburban home with the white picket fence. This is low time preference behavior, the very foundation of civilization. But when money is a melting ice cube, you are forced into high time preference. You spend it as fast as you get it because it will buy less tomorrow. You chase risky investments, caught in the FOMO of the latest meme stock or crypto because a savings account is a guaranteed loss. You look for get-rich-quick schemes. You stop thinking in decades and start thinking in minutes. This shift in psychology is why our culture feels so disposable, why our architecture is ugly and cheap, and why our society feels increasingly fractured and impulsive. We are a civilization that has lost its anchor, drifting in a sea of instant gratification fueled by fake money.
And now we are approaching the final boss of the 1971 experiment, the central bank digital currency, or CBDC. The people who control the printing presses realize that the current system is reaching its mathematical limit. The national debt is too high to ever be repaid, and the faith and credit is wearing thin. Their solution isn't to fix the money, it's to gain total control over it. A CBDC is not just digital money. We already have that. A CBDC is programmable money. It is a tool that allows the government to see every single transaction you make in real time. It allows them to turn off your ability to spend if you cross a political line. It allows them to bake expiration dates into your savings to force you to spend and stimulate the economy. It is the ultimate tool of surveillance, a financial panopticon that makes the Nixon Shock look like a playground prank. 1971 was the year they decoupled money from gold. 2026 is the year they plan to couple money with your identity and your behavior. But here is the part they didn't count on. The information age that helped them manipulate the data also gave us the tools to fight back. For thousands of years, gold was the only escape. It was the barbarous relic that couldn't be printed, couldn't be faked, and didn't require a government's permission to exist. And today, gold is still doing exactly what it was meant to do, preserving wealth across generations while empires rise and fall. But in 2009, a ghost appeared in the machine. An anonymous creator known as Satoshi Nakamoto released a piece of code that did the impossible. It created digital scarcity. Bitcoin is the antithesis of 1971. If Nixon's speech was the great decoupling, Bitcoin is the great recoupling. It is a system where the rules are written in math, not in political whims. There will only ever be 21 million. No secret meetings at Camp David can change that. No Texas politician can bully the network into printing more. For the first time in 50 years, the average person has access to a lifeboat, a way to opt out of a system that is designed to devalue their labor.
We are standing at the most important crossroads in the history of finance. On one side is the path we've been on since 1971, a path of endless debt, spiraling inflation that makes a 7% mortgage rate feel like a steal, and the eventual total control of CBDCs. On the other side is a return to hard money, whether it's the ancient stability of gold or the digital sovereignty of Bitcoin. The Nixon shock wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. It was a choice to prioritize the short-term survival of a political regime over the long-term prosperity of a nation. And every day that you use their money, you are participating in that choice. But you don't have to be a victim of 1971 anymore. You can educate yourself, you can move your labor into assets that they can't print, you can stop measuring your success in dollars, a unit of measurement that changes every day, and start measuring it in time, in energy, and in real, tangible value. The temporary suspension of the gold standard has lasted 55 years. The debt clock is screaming, the social fabric is tearing, the experiment is failing. August 15th, 1971 was the day the world broke, but today is the day you can decide to stop being broken by it. The greatest lie in history only works as long as you believe it. It's time to stop believing. It's time to wake up. If this story shook you, it's because the truth is heavy. We've traced the heist of the century, but your journey is just beginning. Subscribe to stay ahead of the collapse. Share this with one person who still thinks their savings account is safe. And tell me in the comments, are you holding on to the ghost of the dollar, or are you looking for an exit? The choice is yours, for now.